Hi, everyone. I hope, well, I say everyone, and I'm the only one, but I hope that some people will join me. I'm going to pull up my Facebook on another device so that I can follow along and see any chat that comes in. I'm really excited to be sharing this today. Somebody gave me the idea, and I was so excited about the idea of like I could just share what I do rather than having, like a fancy thing, and a scheduled thing that's all amazing, but rather I would just reveal my teacher self to you and how I prepare as a teacher. So I'm excited about that. If you post a comment, I should be able to see it. So that's why I have Facebook open on one, because I should be able to see the YouTube comments on this side. I'm not sure. Hopefully, if you make a comment and I don't notice it, I'll be able to circle back later. So I do hope that what I'm going to share will be valuable. So what I'm talking about today is how I prepare to have a book discussion online. Now, specifically, I'm talking about online, but truly it's similar to how I would prepare for a book discussion in person with just a few tweaks. So I've got to do some of the things I've got to do are prep my questions. I've got to obviously read the material that I'm going to be discussing. I need to gather my props. I need to plan out my pacing. All of those things are going to happen whether I'm teaching in person or teaching virtually. So that's going to be the same. So the things that are different, I'll mention. So one of the things I have to decide on is a format. So when I'm doing my normal online classes, I typically create a PowerPoint slide deck, and I've shown that before. I'll go back later and link that video in the description. I think that's still up, where I showed like how I do my online teaching. And I use this slide deck. So sometimes it will involve creating a slide deck, but I can also decide to just do an informal one without a presentation that is a discussion. And that is what I'll be doing tonight with students. So I'll be back on tonight at 7 o'clock Central, teaching a class to actual students. And I am using a discussion format for that without a slide deck. So it's just an more informal feel. If I'm doing an informal feel, it can be just me, or I can also invite either a guest or even students to participate. So that's kind of fun. Now, I use Streamyard. It's called, let me see, I might be able to post it in here. Streamyard is what I use to live stream onto my my Facebook is what I'm using right now. And usually I use it to go to YouTube, but it can connect to other social media as well. So it can connect to LinkedIn, it can connect to Facebook, which it is connecting to right now as well. So as a teacher, I would say that I would invite you to consider creating a Facebook for your teaching. And I know you may hate Facebook, and maybe the only time you're on it is to do this. But a lot of people have that love-hate relationship with Facebook where they hate it, they wish they didn't need it, but nothing else works quite the same, and so they use it. Or maybe they use it only to participate in some groups. And so I have seen a kindergarten teacher actually, and he has a kindergarten page called Kinder Rockets. I'm going to put the link to it in the comments here, because this teacher has used Facebook to share and keep everything going really well during the pandemic. And you can see how how the teacher has like protected student privacy while still being this amazing resource. So I think that you could use Facebook and then use StreamYard to live stream to it. And when you use StreamYard, you can invite guests. So StreamYard has a free account, which is the one I would suggest for you. And I think that would be a super cool thing to do. But I've seen it done so well. But even if you're using Zoom or whatever, you can still showcase students. So those platforms do allow you to highlight a speaker. I think a blend would be super cool, where you like have a recording of a Zoom, like maybe you talk with a couple of students, or maybe how cool would it be if a couple of teachers got together, like maybe 3 or 4 teachers, and discussed a book that they're all going to talk about in class, and then you showed that video to students or put that video in your learning management platform. I think that that would be really cool. A lot of times video, like people, almost everybody is just zoomed out, or whatever platform you're using. They're just, you know, tired of it, whether it's Google Meet, whether it's Microsoft Teams, whatever it is. We've been so inundated with it in the last 15 months that it can be almost like, oh, really? And it used to be, seriously, when I first started teaching and I could wheel out the big TV, and if I put in a VHS tape, the kids would just lie on the carpet like this for as long as I would let them. And now I think it's like, because they're so used to it, it doesn't have that same power that it's had in the past. And so I think that if you do something different with it, where you're like recording a video and playing it in class where they're watching you, but you're also standing there, that's kind of meta. It also allows you to invite some guests, some special guests, and you can do that in StreamYard, like I mentioned, but you can also do it in Zoom. So I think that blend would be kind of cool. One of the things I have to do when I'm going to be hosting it virtually as opposed to just in person in my classroom is that I have to figure out how to manage the chat. And I also have to figure out how to make it an actual discussion so it doesn't just feel like a lecture. And so there are a few things that I suggest for this. So one of the things is it's so helpful to have somebody manage the chat. It is really, really, really helpful. So all through the pandemic, my husband has managed the chat. If he wasn't available, I asked my son to do it. And so you may be thinking, yeah, that's great for you that your husband is available, but what about in a regular classroom? And what I would say is, see if there are college students who are either near you or doing online who need classroom observation hours, who might be willing to monitor the chat as part of those hours. You may even have at your local high school, they may have a program, like the one at my high school is called Ready, Set, Teach. And Ready, Set, Teach is a program for people who want to be teachers. In my school district, it's an amazing program. If you complete the Ready, Set, Teach program, and then you go to an accredited college and you graduate and you want a teaching job, you are guaranteed a teaching job in the district if you complete that program. It's incredible. But kids in there need hours in classrooms, and they might be willing to or available to help you manage the chat. Another thing you can do is that you can record a video and you can play the video and you are in the chat. So you are managing the chat and you are just have a video of yourself playing. And then you can maybe pause that video in order to ask questions. Like the person in the video, you in the video, ask a question, and then you pause that and you let students answer in the chat and you're responding to them in the chat. So the video isn't actually live. You are live in the chat. So those are a few ideas. There's an extra layer here, but it definitely can be done. And I've been doing it. I don't even know how many I've done, but I've been doing it for, well, over a year, right? Like since March of 2020, I've been doing this and just figuring out as I go, and some things work better than others. I have to adjust my, oh, wait, I had one other thing first. One key is becoming used to asking a question and having there be a lag time. So because there's a little lag in the way the video is, and I can actually see this right now because I'm looking at a computer that is showing me the StreamYard. But to my left, I've pulled up Facebook. I just did to make sure I was live on Facebook. And I can tell that there's just a little lag. It's not instantaneous. And so what can happen is you ask students a question and they don't respond right away. And you're sitting there going, did you hear the question? And so one of the things I suggest is getting very comfortable with that lag time. What I usually do in that time is take the time to go back and skim through comments that I might have missed, or comments that I didn't miss, but maybe I'll dive a little bit deeper while those answers are coming in. Another thing you can do is to play music or even hum it yourself, right? Like you can ask a question and then be like, do, 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 do. Do, 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 right? Like you can use it. You can use all kinds of music with that. So I also have to adjust my props. So I like to use props. I use puppets. I use clappers. I use bells. I use a lightsaber, because everybody does. And I have all these props, and I have to make sure that the props are big enough and loud enough. So my thunder tube is one of my students' favorites. I'd say the puppets are hands down their #1 favorite. And I'm gonna put the name of the company I get my puppets from in the comments, but I get my puppets from Folk Manus. And my students absolutely love these puppets, but I have other props that they like, and one of them is the thunder tube, and it's loud. But I have some props that I can use in my in-person classroom that don't really work in a virtual environment. So I have to choose my props. They just have to be big enough to see and to hear. All right, second question. So the first question was, how do I prep for this online experience? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, just in a different more pedagogical approach, but that's more of the structure and the actual like workings of it. Okay, the second question, how much of the plot do you share? Now, this is a question that is true whether you're in person or doing it in a video type format. We're always in this conflict between, I don't want to recap so much of the plot that we're not really discussing anything of value. But at the same time, I know that I have kids who either didn't read it, didn't do the reading at all for whatever reason, valid or invalid, or I have kids who read it, but the parts of the plot that I'm going to be discussing didn't necessarily capture their attention. And so that can happen. I mean, there's so many reasons why a plot might need to be revisited. And so this is what I do. And again, these are just my ideas. I just thought I would jump on and share my ideas. You can do whatever you like, but this is what I do. Okay, so the first thing is, I'm a strong believer in not punishing kids who didn't read. Yes, I wish that they did read. I wish that they did the reading. Would they have a better time if they did the reading? Yes. And so really my job is to make sure that they can still participate in the discussion and to help them feel like maybe next time I should do the reading, right? Like maybe I would have a better time if I did them for not doing the reading. If I do that, if I punish them, if I make them feel badly because they didn't do the reading, then my classroom becomes a dopamine desert where they just feel badly about themselves. And that translates into all aspects. Kids are not going to process, and even adults don't process, you know what, I feel terrible about this, but it was my own fault. Nobody does that. What they do is they sit there thinking, I feel terrible about this, and I would rather be anywhere but here. And so I don't want my class to be a dopamine desert. If the discussion is done well and they see the other students' comments, either from this particular current discussion or from a previous discussion, if they see those being highlighted, if they see how the kids who did read, it's clear in their comments that they read, then they'll want to read. I want to lure them into reading, not push or punish them into reading. That's what I'm going to be doing. I usually, especially if I'm using a slide deck, I will begin the discussion with a revisit of the story arc. So I'll use that standard English teacher plot diagram. What was the backstory? What was the inciting incident? Let's look at the rising action. What was the climax? What was the falling action? And what was the resolution? I'll review that. That's good for kids who both read and didn't read. Do you love that? Hashtag English teacher fail. So stay tuned though for how I'm changing that up tonight. So tonight's class on Arthurian legend, we're reading, I'll pull out the book. We're reading this book, and we're reading book 1 of it tonight. So till here. So we're talking about this much of this book tonight. And I'm not going to do that normal arc because this is composed of multiple chapters that serve as almost individual vignettes. And so it does not have a single narrative arc. But usually that's what I do. When I share that plot arc, then everyone is up to speed. All right, next. How do I write good questions? Well, I have a whole course on writing questions, and I wrote an ebook with all the depth and complexity question stems. So I was a little bit worried about being redundant in case you guys have had access to those already. So I don't want to be redundant. I'm going to try to give some different tips. So the first is I want a balance of the different types of questions. I want not just questions that require short answers, but also some that require long answers. I want some that require lots of thinking, some that require just a little bit of thinking. So I want to vary the type of the question that I'm asking. I also sometimes will give in the question a little bit of content so that even students who didn't do the reading can think about it. Also, students who did do the reading might be more thoughtful about their answers if I'm giving it a little bit of context. I will ask questions that ask for a reasoned opinion. Occasionally, I ask a question that is just purely opinion, like, what do you like? Because I want some of the questions to appeal to their intellectual side, and I want some of the questions to appeal to that social, emotional, affective domain. I want to challenge the text. So I'm going to ask questions that invite my students to push back against that author. I want them to disagree with the author. I want them to not accept what the author is saying at face value. I want them to be more challenging of it. I want to ask questions that are going to expect them to hold on to something for a while. So whether they're going to connect it with future reading that we're going to do, or whether they're going to just hold on through this story, I will do that. Maybe it will be this story, maybe it will be another, but I am going to ask some questions that ask them to hold on. Like, okay, think about this and now hold on to that, and then take it through the experience. I also want to ask questions that refer to prior reading, either reading I know they've done because we've done it together, or reading that they may have done outside of class. I also want to ask questions that ask for a takeaway from the reading. What did you get out of it? What did you like? What do you think was the message? And yes, we can get into that more formally with like, what was the author's purpose or intent? But I also really am going to focus on life lesson. Like, what do we really learn from this? Like, if this were a manual for life, what would we take away from this story? So let's look at a few of those for tonight. So when I am preparing my questions, I type them out in just a Google Doc, and you'll see that some of them are highlighted. So the ones that are highlighted are the questions that I for sure want to ask. So the reason that I highlight those is because I prepare more questions than what I can really use in a class. And so I'm going to highlight the ones that are like I really want to discuss them, so that if we're running out of time, I don't have to sit there wasting mental energy and having the kids lose interest while I skim through the questions looking for the one I really want to ask. So let me share some of these questions with you. So these are the questions that I've written about this book. And this book, if you're curious about it, obviously you're welcome to join in tonight and watch. I would say, I have said that this book would be appropriate for 4th through 12th grade, as long as the 4th graders and even 5th were fairly advanced readers. So, I'm a gifted education person, so I know what some 4th graders are capable of, definitely capable of this. A gifted 4th grader, 5th grader. I would say its core intended audience is probably 6th through 9th, would be its core audience, but this is one of my favorites. This is published as a Puffin Classic, and this is one of my favorite treatments of the Arthurian legend. I've taken graduate classes in Arthurian legend, and so I'm kind of picky about them, and this one I really like. So this is what we're talking about. Okay, so let me share with you some of the questions. And even if you're unfamiliar with Arthurian legend at all, that doesn't matter. I think you're going to be able to see what I mean by the different kinds of questions that I ask. So first question. When Uther Pendragon falls in love with Gorlaw's wife, the die is cast. We've got the 3 legitimate Pendragon daughters, including Morgan Le Fay, who is to Arthurian legend what Bellatrix Lestrange is to Harry Potter. And we've got this mystery child who turns out to be King Arthur. Now, we usually start talking about Arthurian legend with the sword and the stone, but I think the root of the story is really here when Uther Pendragon falls in love with Gorlaw's wife. What do you think? Okay, so that's an example of how I am not having them come in cold, right? I'm giving them like, oh, there's this, there's that. I'm making a connection to something that they probably are familiar with in Harry Potter. And then I am asking the questions. So they're having some time to get those neural pathways firing while I'm setting up the stage up for this question. Okay, here's another example. So we come to the sword and the stone. Why is this such a powerful image? I mean, why do they make a whole movie that they call The Sword and the Stone? It's some people's favorite Disney movie. Why? Why is that image of this boy coming upon the stone with a sword in it and pulling it out? Why is that so powerful, right? So that is an opinion question, right? They don't have to have read the book. They could have seen the movie. They could have just heard the allusion. Next, another example of a question where this is a question, I'll share one where I ask for a reasoned opinion. So we've got another sword to be pulled here. This is in the story of Balin and Balin. We've got another sword to be pulled here by a fated, virtuous knight. So there's such a strong emphasis on destiny in this story. Like everything is fated. Merlin is constantly making predictions. Is that important? Like, is it important, this idea of destiny and fate? Could the story exist in its strength without that? Okay, you have to know the story to be able to answer this question. This is a question that asks for reasoned opinion. So I will ask those kinds of questions too. I will also ask questions that pull from prior knowledge. So here's an example of that. So Balin steps forward and is able to draw the sword and falls in love with it so much that he refuses to give it back to the woman to whom it rightfully belongs. Of course, it's a magic weapon, aren't they all? And now it's cursed. He is going to kill the man he loves best with it, which we find out later is his brother. Where else in stories can you think of that you've seen someone like fall in love with a cursed object or become obsessed with something that is not meant for them and it causes them harm? Okay, so that's the question. And you see, like, they don't have to have read the story to make it make sense, although if they have read the story, it will make more sense. But they also are connecting to, maybe they'll think of Gollum in Lord of the Rings, who has my precious, right? So they might think of that. That is one that asks for prior knowledge. I am also going to do, remember what I said about that I'm going to ask questions that look forward to future reading. So here's an example of this. Merlin's at his prophesying again on page 34. He tells Balin he's going to strike the dolorous stroke, and we're going to get to that later. He leads them to wait for King Ryan, the enemy, to come by. And they capture King Ryan, and Merlin takes him back to Caerleon, where Arthur is. And there's this big battle, and Arthur is saved by King Pellinore. And when Merlin tells Arthur that he also owes Balin for the victory, he says that the story of Balin and Balin will be the saddest of any. For he that drew that sword is the most unfortunate of all knights. So I want to know if you agree. I want to know, do you think there are sadder stories that you've read about knights that you already know are sadder? I want to make sure that we circle back to this as we go through the book. So this is just the second story that we're reading. And we're going to read a lot of these stories of the Knights of the Round Table. And at the end, I want us to circle back to this idea. Do we agree or disagree with Merlin that the story of Balin is the saddest? Okay, so that's how I am creating curiosity, a need to know, to read the rest of the stories by asking them, is this the saddest of them all, right? And whenever I'm going to ask kids to make a judgment like that, I am creating curiosity. So I'll ask questions like that. I also ask lots of short, almost pithy questions. So I've been giving you some of the longer ones I'm asking tonight, but here's one I asked. At the bottom of page 49, we get Merlin with his predictions again. Is it even foreshadowing if the character comes right out and says it? Like, if we think of foreshadowing as when the author gives hints as what's to come, but can we even call it foreshadowing if Merlin says, and this is going to happen, right? This is a shorter question. I don't give a lot of backstory. I'm not giving a lot of context. I'm just asking this question. I mentioned that I ask questions to challenge the author. So here's one of these. So King Pellinore, he's so focused on his task of finding Lady Nimue, which doesn't really seem like the task he set out for anyway, but we'll let that go. I feel like the author maybe made an error there. In fact, I think there are two errors in that part because anyway, that isn't the important thing I want to focus on right now. What I want to say is, doesn't really seem like that was the task that King Pellinore set out for, but he's so focused on Lady Nimue that he won't help this lady in distress, and she ends up killing herself over grief because he wouldn't help her. And then we find out from Merlin later it was his own daughter. And I'm just wondering, is that even reasonable? Like, is it reasonable for the author to expect us to believe that he's going to not even recognize his own daughter? I mean, this story is full of disguise, but she's not disguised, and she's standing there talking to him face to face, and we're supposed to believe that he didn't even recognize her. Is that believable? Who's willing to take the author's side, and who's willing to argue back, right? And so that's how I can get some discussion going. I want them to always feel good about challenging the author. I never want my students to feel like the author is some like protected class where he or she cannot be argued against, and that whatever they say is the end all be all and is the gospel according to, in this case, Roger Lancelyn Green, right? Like, I want them to fight back against the author. I want them to fight back against me. If you can hear buzzing, I have an electrician here. We had to get a new water heater, and our old water heater was not installed according to electrical code, and so they're having to fix that. So if you hear buzzing, that's what that is. All right. I also want questions that ask for deep thinking. So here's one of those. Nimue tells Merlin that she's got to go back to Camelot to help Arthur because Morgan Le Fay is weaving her wicked spells around to entrap him. And yet Nimue has just entranced Merlin and put him in a deep sleep that he will stay in for centuries, and has locked him up in a tower underground, like essentially buried him alive, only he's not going to die somehow. Is she a hypocrite? Is she a hypocrite? Is Nimue a hypocrite for saying that Morgan Le Fay is evil for weaving spells around Arthur, but somehow she's not evil, even though she's weaving spells around Merlin? So I'm going to ask them those kinds of deeper questions. I also mentioned the takeaway question. So this is the last one of my questions I'll share with you. Morgan Le Fay decides to kill her husband while he naps. And I think one of the best lessons in the book so far is never, ever, ever, no matter how tired you are, under any circumstances, fall asleep in the vicinity of Morgan Le Fay. So what other lessons are there so far? Like, what life lessons can we get so far? What can we pull out so far? Right. Now, one thing that you may have noticed about me in these questions is that I sometimes am repetitive in them. Like, I say the same question multiple times, or in a little bit different ways, repeat a few words, maybe say them again with emphasis. And the reason I'm doing that is that it's almost a stall tactic to manage that delay and give kids time to think. Also, some kids whose attention had drifted off maybe will get pulled back partway in, and I don't want them to be completely lost. All right, that's how I ask questions. Now, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I think I can see them. I know I can. I feel like I can. So if you have any, put them there. All right, next. How do I choose books and how do I choose books to empower and interest students? So the way that I choose books is I ask, what do they need to have read in order to understand illusion later? So Arthurian legend I picked for this reason, right? You're not going to understand the Western canon of literature if you haven't read two things: the Bible and Arthurian legend. If you haven't read those two things, you will not understand half of the illusion you will encounter. So that is a reason to pick a book. I know this one is going to sound crazy. This is going to sound like the craziest one. I should probably wait. Anyway, I think that I think about when they're grown up. I imagine my students all grown up at a work Christmas party. And they're all standing around talking to people, and somebody brings up a book they read when they were a kid or when they were in high school. I don't want my students to have that situation and have to say, oh, I didn't really read anything, or we never read that, for a book that everyone else has read. So I don't want them to commit faux pas at cocktail parties. So I felt that way when I taught Huckleberry Finn for a really, really, really long time. And I don't teach that grade particularly anymore, so I haven't taught that book in a while. But all the teachers in the school district taught 6 pages of Huckleberry Finn. That's all that was required. And my students read the whole book. Hold on a second. Echo, stop cleaning the floors. My robot vacuum just went off. Okay, and if you had a golden retriever like I do, you would also need a robot vacuum because they shed like a dog. Okay, so I want them, when we're reading Huckleberry Finn, we read the whole book. And the reason is I don't want them to be meeting their future spouse's parents and find out that person is a teacher, and the teacher says, oh, what did you think about Huck Finn? And they're like, oh, we only read 6 pages. No, we're going to read the whole thing. All right. I also teach what I love. Like, I choose books based on what I love. My guiding, if you've seen me in person, you probably heard me say, like, my guiding mantra as a teacher is the quote from William Wordsworth, what we have loved, others will love, and we will show them how. Like, I feel like that's my job as a teacher. So if there's a book that I truly love, I know I can get my students to love it too. The only time that has not been true is with Flowers for Algernon. I was unable to convince 100% of my students. I persuaded about 85 or 90%, but maybe 10% still hate it. I also want them to read what other people their age are reading and loving. So I look on Goodreads for recommendations. I look on blogs. I look on librarian Facebook groups. I'm looking for other places that I can find books that kids that grade level are reading and loving. I also will choose books based on what I'm preparing them for. So let's say I know that I'm teaching 10th grade and I know that they're going to be reading Huckleberry Finn in 11th grade. Then I might choose Antigone over a different play or Julius Caesar, because those 2 plays are plays that show where someone stands up for what's right. Like, honor is a big point, and that is a key point in Huckleberry Finn. And I'll be able to say, next year you're going to read Huckleberry Finn, and when you do, you're going to see another take on this. this eternal theme of honor and integrity and standing for what's right, even if you stand alone. I also ask what they have loved in the past. And then I will do kind of one of those fake perfume things where, if you liked this, you may love that. And I will find out, like, if they loved reading the Hunger Games, can I find something I want to teach that might, I will find something I want to teach that might relate to that. Or, if you loved Hunger Games, if you liked Hunger Games, you'll love this. Next is, the next thing is, how do I manage the environment? So it's different to manage an environment where students are choosing to be with you versus forced to be with you. And so if students are forced to be with you, like in a normal class discussion, then one of the things I think is really important to do is to make the expectations clear and make them available all of the time. So not where students like get told the expectations and then they're never mentioned again. They have to be constantly revisited. And I don't think that's just a kid thing. I think for adults as well. So make those expectations clear and find a way to revisit them. So one of the things that I might suggest is, I'm going to put it in the chat here. There's a website called Fiverr. And on Fiverr, you can get people to do cool things for you for like around $5. And I know, ask me how I know, for $5 or $10, you can have somebody record a pretty cool video where they go through the like rules and expectations. And then you can embed that video. You can use it over and over and over again and play this video that's like silly. Maybe it's a puppet. You can hire somebody to make a video where a puppet's talking, or one of those dry board, like whiteboard type discussions. And then you just throw that in there. And it's not just you saying, remember, boys and girls, we need to be sure we blah, 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 right? No, it doesn't feel like that. It feels kind of fun. So I love getting Fiverr to do that kind of heavy lifting for me. Be really consistent. And one thing I suggest is, and let me not just move on from that, be consistent. If you are going to address certain behavior, make sure you always do. It can't be just like, I don't know, right? So make sure you're consistent, so that if you typically don't allow something, make sure that that's consistent, or else it's worse than having no expectations at all. One thing I really suggest is having a way to express your disapproval or unhappiness. So if kids are getting out of control in chat, or you feel like they're not really participating, you can say things like, I sense a disturbance in the force, or ruh-roh, or Houston, we have a problem, right? Whatever works for you. It may be a signal, it may be a clap, it may be something like, hey, 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 let's get back on track, right? Like whatever works for you, but have some kind of signal that you use every time, so that your students know when they hear that, oh wait, we got to re-engage here. Move at pace. Sometimes the problem is the content is lagging. And so if you're noticing that more than one person is starting to kind of wander in their attention, or they're being off task in the chat, then switch the content, move on. Even if you had really cool stuff to talk about, just press forward. And then enlist a core group to help. Get a couple kids in the class who are willing to not argue with other kids, not call other kids out, not try to get them in trouble, but rather get that chat back on track, like to throw in an answer or a question that comes back to it. Now, you're going to have kids who do feel confident in saying like, hey, cut it out, we need to come back into the class, right? But they don't have to be that strident about it. Even if they start making comments that are on task, it's going to have a strong impact on the rest of the class. So enlist a few kids to help you. And if you can find that one kid in your class, even if they're the class clown, you'd be surprised at how willing they can be to help. Okay, so those are my general tips. Now I'm going to share with you, to wrap up, how I handle Arthur. So I'm handling King Arthur tonight as a discussion, and I've got my son who will be participating, and then I'm also invited a student And so the three of us will be discussing, and then the rest of the class will be in the chat. So the three of us will be in video discussing live, and there'll be a live chat, and we'll be managing that. I'm expecting tech issues. I've got a student joining in via video, and that could go wrong. I'm streaming it to YouTube. That can go wrong. I mean, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. I'm expecting that. Because I'm expecting that, it's not going to stress me out when it happens. At least I hope not, because sometimes tech can really stress you out. So expect tech. And then there's an old Monty Python movies where like no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, and tech difficulties, they're expected, right? You can expect them. I am excited about it myself. And that is one thing I do to prepare. I get really excited about it. I am so excited to share this with them. And I'm excited to have this experience with them this summer. We're going to be doing 4 classes over this book, and I'm really excited to share it with them. And usually I do this. So years ago, I started doing these summer reads together because my son, when he was in 9th grade, had to read what do you have to read? A Tale of Two Cities. He had to read Tale of Two Cities. They all had to read it, all the pre-AP English. They're not going to read it. So I just said, hey, have them all come over. And I led discussions. I made a study guide for Tale of Two Cities for all these kids who were not my students. And they came over all summer, and we read through the book, and then we had a watch party and watched a version of the movie and compared and contrast. So I loved it. I look forward to it. So choose something you're excited about. I chose a mid-level thorough book. So I chose a book that I thought would appeal to all of the students in the class. And I am approaching the book from a canonical foundation perspective, meaning that I'm approaching that this book is worth reading because it will make you better able to understand every single story you read for the rest of your life. Every single story you read for the rest of your life is dependent upon some way in the archetypes in this. And I'm also using it as an exploration of archetype. And I've got it divided into 4 parts to keep the pacing reasonable and not try to cover too much at any one time. So that's how I'm handling this. So I do not actually see any questions. And what I don't know is, this is the very first time I've done this streaming to both Facebook and YouTube. So what I can't tell is it just not like showing me comments because of that? Or has nobody had any comments? So I'll wait just a second to see if any comments come in. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments or reach out to me later. And I hope that this was useful to you. I just made the decision yesterday. You know what? I'm going to jump on and tell people how I prepare for book discussions with kids. So, oh, thank you, Jennifer. Oh, I have to show something. I got this. I'm wearing this t-shirt. It says Mrs. Vanstar, which is what my students call me. And 2 of my kids in my class mailed this to me. They had this made and they mailed it to me. And I love it so, so much. And I think it shows how, like, I have never met them. It has all been online. And I think that is so powerful to show that you can make strong connections with students, and that you even virtually. And so whether you're going to be teaching virtually next year, whether you're doing in person or whether it's a blend, you can make those powerful connections with students. So I see, Jennifer, thank you so much. And then Lisa Porter, I'm listening and love your information and feel like it's even applicable to upper elementary, and no questions. So yeah, I think it is. And I think partly it's because good teaching is just good teaching. I started out teaching 3rd grade. And in 3rd grade, when I moved from 3rd grade to 9th grade, I was voluntold. When I moved from 3rd grade to 9th grade, I was shocked at how similar it was. Like, it's one of the beauties of teaching language arts, actually. So, well, thank you so much for joining in. I hope you found it useful. If you came in the middle, let's see, I don't even know how long this has been going on, but if you came in the middle, you'll be able to go watch it again, and it's going to be on the Facebook and the YouTube. And so I really appreciate your joining in, and I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Feel free to join in YouTube only tonight at 7 o'clock to see what the kids do with this and see how it works and watch if there's an epic tech disaster. So I will talk to you guys later. Maybe we'll do this again. Take care.